Hi. Okay, so this story really begins when I'm 16, 17 years old. And my parents, who I've mentioned in the past, had divorced. And to me, that really wasn't a problem because I was really too little at the time to understand. So I don't really feel like it ever, that particular thing ever traumatized me. It certainly did change my life in the sense that my parents did entirely different things, and so I was a part of that, and so in that way it did. But I was too little to feel trauma about it, although I have two older brothers and they both had significant trauma over that whole disaster with the fighting and the everything that happened. That was not good on them, but me, I came through relatively unscathed. So my parents, when I was, there's a lot of alcoholism in my family, as in many families. But as I was growing up, my parents didn't drink when I was very little, and once they split when I was about 6, they started going out, drinking. They both eventually had a little more money, and so that very much more became a thing. So I was blessed that that really wasn't too much of an influence in my life, although I lived with my mom and my brothers, and I do remember my mom when she went to work, and she worked in a big company, and it became commonplace for her, at least on Friday night, to go to this company hangout place, which was a bar. It was called Petruzzello's, and I think it was a restaurant too, but she would go there and party it up with her friends and then come home. And she was always quite respectful about it and responsible for the most part as I was growing up. So even though alcohol had sort of entered, it wasn't a problem at that time. So then fast forward till I'm 12 going on 13, and she buys a travel agency. And so we moved from inland California down to the coast. And of course, that was a wonderful thing. We loved living next to the ocean, and so that was all good. And she was working really hard because this travel agency needed a lot of work, and she often was working late nights, and I was home by myself because my brothers were quite a bit older than me, and they were off on their own lives by that time. So I was essentially an only child, and my mom was working a lot. So by the time I was about 15, 16, she met another man and decided to get married. And I did not like this guy. He didn't really care much about me one way or another. I just thought he was a little slimy, and I just didn't like him. But, it was not my opinion that counted there. So in general, I sort of went along with it. But then my mom and this guy started drinking a lot more. Then it was wine during the week, after work. Then it was, I don't know, something on Saturdays. Sunday was Bloody Marys in the morning, and on it went from there. So by the time I was 16, 17, we were having dinners, and they were drinking wine with dinner, and so I talked my mom into giving me wine too. So of course it starts out with a little bit of wine, and in the meantime she's involved in this marriage which is not working out well, and they're arguing with each other and fighting all the time. And he lived up in Los Angeles, and he wanted her in the area up there, and he wanted her to move up there, and she wanted him to move down to the beach, and they fought and argued and screamed at each other on the phone, and it was just not pleasant. She made a lot of decisions during that time that affected me badly. But that's okay because I started drinking with her. And by the time I was 19, I was still living at home, and she'd bought a condo. And the house that we had been in before was a duplex, which we rented. And so now she's saying to me, well, if you're going to drink, stay here with me and drink. I don't want you in bars. I was okay. So we drank a lot, and of course got into fights and all that kind of stuff. And then I moved out when I would think I was 20 and got my own place, and must have been close to, well, probably 21, because then I could go buy, I was working as a travel agent. I had a salary. I could afford an apartment. I think the apartment was $125 a month. And so I continued on with that habit, and I didn't like going to bars. I'm not a person who ever enjoys being in a crowd of people. And so I continued to drink by myself. And that got worse and worse because there was nobody to tell me no. And I got to the point where then I moved from that apartment to another apartment, and I was still working as a travel agent. And I got to the point where I was drinking a bottle of wine every night. So we're talking 4 large glasses of wine every night. And I realized at that point that I had a problem. But I continued to drink and sort of forgot about that. So now I'm 25, and I decided I love to travel, still love to travel, will always love to travel. That's a ethic that my mom gave to me by buying a travel agency and taking me on trips, and we had a lot of nice trips. And so I decided, I was talking to a friend, and she was telling me that she was working as a nursing assistant and that she was making more money than I was making as a travel agent. And I loved taking care of people. My mom during that time we had a 2-story condo and duplex apartment, and she was walking down the stairs and she had on some slippers. And if you've ever had a 2-story house with carpet on the stairs, you will know that it can get really slippery. And so this day, I myself have fallen down stairs. I've fallen down carpeted stairs. I've fallen down uncarpeted stairs, but falling back and sliding, not head over heels. And this day, when she went down the stairs, it was sitting. So she slid down the stairs, and 3 steps from the bottom she hit, and she broke vertebrae in her lower back. So I, at 14, was nursing her through that, and she had to lay in bed, and I don't think she had a cast at that time, but later on she broke her kneecap and she did have a cast. But I took care of her and everything. So I felt like I'd always wanted to be a nurse, and especially since I was a little girl, and my brothers used to give me great presents for Christmas. They'd save their money. They had paper routes and they did all kinds of things, and they were so sweet to me, and they would buy me these great presents. And one of them was a nursing kit, and it had a toy stethoscope and tweezers and I don't know what else, and bottles of candy pills. And so my brothers would play war, and I would heal them by giving them candy pills. So that kind of started it all off. So I went to this nursing home, and I interviewed, and I got the job even though I had no experience. But they had a program where they would teach you how to be a nursing assistant and pay you at the same time. So that really worked well. I moved back to my mom's house for a little while, so I didn't have the expense. I was supposed to pay her rent. I probably did that about once, and she never said anything about it, and I did move out about a year later, but that was very kind of her to let me do that. But of course, moms are that way, so that was good. So I one evening I went to work there in, I think, maybe August of my 25th year, and in October, in walks, I'm doing rounds. There was a kid there named Carlos who was also a nursing assistant, and so in the evening, I was on the 3 to 11 shift, and so in the evening we would do rounds, and we'd go through everybody who was in bed and make sure that these are old people. This was a convalescent hospital at the time, is what they called it. Now they call it a skilled nursing facility. And so we would do rounds and make sure everybody was warm and dry, and we're doing rounds, and we're in the first room of our rounds, and Carlos and I are fixing this bed, and this darling little lady named Ivy, sweet, sweet little lady. And into the room, there in the doorway is this young man, handsome young man. And I look at him and he looks at me, and we developed a friendship quickly and started working together. And then ultimately that's the man that I married about 4 years later. So when we were dating, I was drinking, and I found out that he liked a particular kind of beer, which was this beer called Grolsch, and it came in these very nice bottled containers with little lids on them and stuff like that. Anyway, so by this time I'm an alcoholic, I mean, for sure, and yet he's coming over to my house, I'm buying him beer, I'm drinking wine, everything is lovely. And then one day he said to me, this is the first time he said to me, I really like you a lot, and I would like to be around you, but he said, my parents were both alcoholics, and I just can't be around that all the time. So the message to me was, if you don't stop drinking, I can't be around. And of course, I was madly in love with him by this time, and I wanted him to be around. And so that house, I had a roommate, and then she moved out, and she got rented a house with my boyfriend at this time and another young guy, and then it was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, and so then she moved in there. And I moved to a separate little apartment, which is really the bottom basement story of a house, and I lived there, and so I continued to drink when he wasn't around, but then when he was there, I wouldn't, or not very much, just occasionally, or we'd go out to eat someplace, and that was acceptable because he was a social drinker. He did not have a problem with alcohol. Okay, so then we get married, and I'm doing the same thing, drinking when he's not around, social drinking sometimes when he is. I would make Italian food, and we'd have a little Chianti. I would make Greek food, and we'd have this wine called Retsina. And so it was kind of geared to the food, and I didn't drink a lot when he wasn't around. But then we go on, and he gets a big job, and he's working as a regional manager for a large company. And so now he's flying out, and he's gone for about 2 weeks out of a month, not all at once usually, but sometimes on the weekends. And so I started drinking when he wasn't there, and it would just be, I was mostly not drinking, so it wasn't like it was bottom of the barrel, whatever, but I wasn't rock bottom, I guess that's the word. But I would drink when he wasn't there. Now we have children. Now we have two beautiful little girls, and one is 5 and one is 2. And he's going off on the weekends. And so without telling him, I would buy a bottle of wine, and while he was gone, I would drink 2 glasses one night and 2 glasses the next night. And I thought, okay, well, that's acceptable. I'm not getting smashed. I'm just, drinking a couple glasses of wine, no big deal. Typical alcoholic behavior. So this one day, it was a Friday, and my husband had left to go out of town, and my older daughter was 5, and she was going to her friend's house for a play date. And so the night before, I had bought a bottle of wine and was going to drink 2 glasses, and I ended up drinking the whole bottle. Now, I had put my little girls to bed at the proper time before I sat down to drink my 2 glasses of wine, which turned out to be 4 large glasses of wine. And they were sleeping soundly, and they were not harmed in any way. But when I woke up the next morning to take my daughter on her play date, I, of course, didn't feel well, and I was so upset with myself because I realized that I did have control over it, and it had caused me to do something that I felt like could have impacted my children. If something had happened, if they'd woken up and somebody was sick and I needed to drive them to the hospital, who knows? I'm the only parent there. My husband's out of town. So that really upset me. And so that I went to this friend's house to put my 2-year-old daughter into her car seat and my 5-year-old daughter in the car, and took them over to my little girl's friend's house. And her parents were also friends of ours. We all went to church together and had a play group when the kids were littler and stuff like that. So I took my daughter there, and I am talking to this couple and who are friends of mine, and I'm explaining to them what happened to me and how upset I was that I had drank this whole bottle, that I didn't have control over it. And so the father, the male half of this couple, whose name was Michael, and he said to me, I was saying, I don't know what to do about this. I'm so upset. And he said, I think I have a book that you might want to read. He said, I'm not sure I have it. I'll have to go upstairs and look. But yeah, so I have this book that if you'd like to read it, I'll go get it. And I said, yeah, of course, I'd like to read that. I'm a reader. Hard to read when you've got little ones, but I would certainly like to do that. So turns out this book, Return from Tomorrow by George G. Ritchie, it was not very long. It's not even 150 pages. And it's an amazing book. And this is where the story gets more supernatural. Kind of, you could say it was supernatural that this all happened, that he ended up having the book and whatever. But this book is the true story of an uncharted journey through the afterlife. As a world war raged around him, a young soldier named George Ritchie barely comprehended his own death as he left the physical world only to return minutes later. Yet, in the space between death and coming back to life, he experienced eternity. In this riveting true story, Dr. George Ritchie shares some of the most stunning and detailed descriptions of life after death. You'll encounter other non-physical beings, travel through different dimensions of time and space, and discover a series of worlds, some hellish in their separation from life, some glorious in their heavenly brilliance. But most amazingly, you'll witness this transformational meeting with the light of the world, the Son of God. So I took my younger daughter, who was 2 at the time, put her in her car seat. This is maybe 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and she rarely fell asleep in the car seat, but on the way home, and it was maybe a 15-minute drive. But this day, she fell asleep just before we got home, and I was disappointed because always, if she got any chance to sleep at all, even if it was just 5 minutes, it'd be like a little cat nap, and then she wouldn't go to sleep. So I thought, oh shoot, I'm not going to be able to read this book. But we pulled in, and she was asleep, and I gently took her out of the car and put her on my shoulder carefully, got her into the house. She's still sleeping. Went, put her down in her crib. She's still sleeping. And I got her down in her crib, and she continued to sleep. So I went out. This is afternoon. And I also should say that she never slept for more than an hour and a half. But on this particular day, she slept for 3 hours. 3 solid hours. And in that time, because this book is only, 136 pages, and I'm a fast reader, I read this entire book. Now, the way this all relates to my alcoholism is that George is a young man. He's in the military. He ends up having this near-death experience because he dies for 9 minutes. And Jesus comes to him and shows him different things to help George, to understand his life a little bit better. And this is exactly what I needed to know, because what it did was it made me realize what I was doing in terms of the alcohol. So Jesus appears to him. George is out of his body, wandering around this hospital, trying to figure out what is going on. He leaves his body and then comes back to the hospital again, and he encounters Jesus. So I'm going to read you just a page or 2 pages of this because he explains it so much better than I could. So he encounters Jesus, and Jesus, among other things, says to him, "Keep your eyes on me," Jesus had told me as we set out on this extraordinary journey. And when I did, whenever I looked at him, the terror vanished, although the dreadful question remained. Without him before me, in fact, I could not have endured the things he was showing me. As fast as thought, we traveled from city to city, seemingly on the familiar earth, even the part of the earth, the United States, and possibly Canada, that I had always known, except for the thousands of non-physical beings that I now observed also inhabiting this normal space. In one house, a younger man followed an older one from room to room. "I'm sorry, Pa," he kept saying. "I didn't know what it would do to Mama. I didn't understand." But though I could hear him clearly, it was obvious that the man he was speaking to could not. The old man was carrying a tray into a room where an elderly woman sat in bed. "I'm sorry, Pa," the young man said again. "I'm sorry, Mama," endlessly, over and over to ears that could not hear. In bafflement, I turned to the brightness beside me, but though I felt his compassion flow like a torrent into the room before us, no understanding lighted my mind. Several times we paused before similar scenes. A boy trailing a teenage girl through the corridors of a school. "I'm sorry, Nancy." A middle-aged woman begging a gray-haired man to forgive her. "What are they so sorry for, Jesus?" I pleaded. "Why do they keep talking to people who can't hear them?" Then from the light beside me came the thought, they are suicides, chained to every consequence of their act. The idea stunned me, yet I knew it came from him, not me, for I saw no more scenes like these, as though the truth he was teaching had been learned. Gradually, I began to notice something else. All of the living people we were watching were surrounded by a faint, luminous glow, almost like an electrical field over the surface of their bodies. This luminosity moved as they moved, like a second skin made out of pale, scarcely visible light. At first, I thought it must be reflected brightness from the person at my side. But the buildings we entered gave off no reflection, neither did inanimate objects, and then I realized that the non-physical beings did not either. My own unsolid body, I now saw, was without this glowing sheath. At this point, the light drew me inside a dingy bar and grill near what looked like a large naval base. A crowd of people, many of them sailors, lined the bar 3 deep, while others jammed wooden booths along the wall. Though a few were drinking beer, most of them seemed to be belting whiskeys as fast as the 2 perspiring bartenders could pour them. Then I noticed a striking thing. A number of the men standing at the bar seemed unable to lift their drinks to their lips. Over and over, I watched them clutch at their shot glasses, hands passing through the solid tumblers, through the heavy wooden countertop, through the very arms and bodies of the drinkers around them. And these men, every one of them, lacked the aureola light that surrounded the others. Then the cocoon of light must be property of physical bodies only. The dead, we who had lost our solidness, had lost this second skin as well. And it was obvious that these living people, the light surrounded ones, the ones actually drinking, talking, jostling each other, could neither see the desperately thirsty, disembodied beings among them, nor feel their frantic pushing to get at those glasses. Though it was clear to me, watching, that the non-solid people could both see and hear each other. Furious quarrels were constantly breaking out among them over the glasses that none could actually get to their lips. I thought I had seen heavy drinking at fraternity parties in Richmond, but the way civilians and servicemen at this bar were going at it beat everything. I watched one young sailor rise unsteadily from a stool, take 2 or 3 steps, and sag heavily to the floor. 2 of his buddies stooped down and started dragging him away from the crush. But that was not what I was looking at. I was staring in amazement at the bright cocoon around the unconscious sailor simply opened up. It parted at the very crown of his head and began peeling away from his head. His shoulders instantly, quicker than I had ever seen anyone move. One of the insubstantial beings who had been standing near him at the bar, was on top of him. He had been hovering like a thirsty shadow at the young sailor's side, greedily following every swallow the young man made. Now he seemed to spring at him like a beast of prey. At the next instant, to my utter mystification, the springing figure had vanished. It all happened even before the two men had dragged their unconscious load from under the feet of those at the bar. 1 minute, I had distinctly seen two individuals. By the time they propped the sailor up against the wall, there was only one. Twice more, as I stared, stupefied, the identical scene was repeated. A man passed out, and one of this non-solid people vanished as he hurled himself at that opening, almost as if he had scrambled inside the other man. Was that covering of light some kind of shield then? Was it a protection against disembodied beings like myself? Presumably, these substanceless creatures had once had solid bodies, as I myself had. Developed a dependence on alcohol that went beyond the physical. That became mental, spiritual even. Then, when they lost that body, except when they could briefly take possession of another one, they would be cut off for all eternity from the thing that they could never stop craving. I read you that part because that's the part that got me. I could see in my mind's eye a veils lift. One time I saw a movie where the camera was moving through, and it was like into a harem or something, and they had these veils lifting off of the camera as it went through. It was just like that, these veils lifting off of me, and the understanding that by drinking I was imperiling myself in such a profound way. So I asked Jesus for help, for healing, for my children, for me, so that I didn't have to drag them through that I would not become a statistic and a life model of that kind of behavior. And he did. He took the desire away from me. I was 35 then. I'm 70 now. I have not drank alcohol since that time, with no problem. I simply lost the desire to drink alcohol then. And it's never returned. And even later, I would buy wine to have in the house for if we had a family occasion, or if my husband wanted to have a glass of wine with dinner. Didn't bother me. I didn't need that. And that day, I felt so blissful, and it lasted for about 24 hours, where I just felt just almost in another world. And after that, no longer any desire to drink. So, I don't know if that's of interest to you in terms of reading that book. A lot of people don't read today, but that book, Return from Tomorrow by George G. Ritchie, changed my life in a very good and profound way. And I'm so happy that I read that book when I did. Obviously, it was meant to be. Obviously, Michael, who gave me that book, I don't know if that's what he was thinking of or not, but probably. And I never talked with him about it after that, I don't think. I think I probably said thank you for giving me the book, and probably I told him that it had helped. But So that's the story of how I quit drinking alcohol permanently. And of course, that affected my life positively in a lot of different ways. So thank you very much for listening. And I'll be back with another story soon. God bless.